Another Great Depression is all but inevitable. That's the view of my guest today. No wonder he's been called the Merchant of Gloom. But then Steve Keen is one of the few economists to have predicted the global financial crisis. And while he used to be a lone voice challenging the economic consensus, more and more people are now listening to him. His way of avoiding depression? Write off the debt, bankrupt the banks, nationalise the financial system, and start all over again. Steve Keen, welcome to Hard Talk.
Delighted to be here.
Do you really think that we are headed for another Great Depression?
We're already in one, and the same thing applied back at the last Great Depression, that people didn't call it one until after it was over. Because in an experience like this, you're always hoping that there's change just around the corner, the system will turn around. It's only after you've been through it, people look back and see that it's been going for some years. So the Great Depression wasn't called the Great Depression until sometime in the late 1930s.
So for those people who are watching, listening to this, thinking, OK, I can cope with things as they are now, they should relax because it's just a few more years of the same?
I wouldn't call it relaxing. But certainly, with the situation now, which economists in particular are hoping is transient, is going to be a drawn-out experience. The best we can hope for is something like what Japan has been through, where Japan still talks about having had a lost decade since 1990, but it's really been a lost 2 decades. The best we can hope for is a lost 2 decades? If we leave it to the basic mechanism by which capitalism eliminates excessive debt, which is bankruptcy and a slow grinding process of paying the debt down. Once we get back down to the level of debt the system actually needs, which is far lower than the level of private debt we have now, then the process will be over. But that could take something like 20 years. And you've also suggested that it could take a rising level of violence. Well, the trouble is when you have a growing population and an economy which is used to growth, and people expecting to get employed when they leave school, and they find that, in fact, there's not enough new jobs coming on to handle the new entrance into the labour market. Even if you grow slightly less than the rate of population change, that means a population, which is you're saying in the recent media, is a lost generation. Well, that lost generation only has one outlet, and that's frustration and violence. It is not the way to manage as effective society, to be caught in a trap like this. And of course what we know from the last Great Depression was that it had a profound effect on politics, and not least led to the rise of, for example, Hitler. Absolutely. Hitler got there because he was the person who reversed the conventional economic behaviour of his time and turned Germany around from unemployment of 25% and more down to full employment, of course building a huge war machine in the process, regarded as a god by his people for doing it. And then we had the catastrophe of the Second World War. But he would never have risen to prominence had it not been the total despair of people in the middle of the last Great Depression. So you can have very, very bad social outcomes out of a process like this, even if people get enlightened about what caused it, and after the event have more wisdom about the amount of debt they'll take on. The transition can be dreadful. Okay, what we have seen so far have been movements like the Occupy Wall Street, or in capital cities around the world, and I know you've spoken to those protesters in Sydney. That, though, when you think about their anger, it's neither left nor right, but it's certainly not right-wing. No, that's right. That's one of the positives to me, because, I mean, the Tea Party was a predecessor in that sense, in terms of a visceral reaction to what they thought was going wrong with the economy, and that has certainly had a right-wing flavour to it. This Occupy Wall Street really is progressive, and generally you typecast them as left, and I've certainly seen quite a few politicians saying it's the usual suspects in the protest movement doing it. But in fact it's been very broadly based, very much youth-based, but also, particularly in America, large numbers of people who are laid off industrial workers, some laid off financial workers, people who wouldn't normally expect to be sitting in a tent at the bottom of Wall Street. So why do you think that's heartening? Because what's a major part about their attitude is that they feel that they've had their trust in society betrayed, and that they want to bring about a harmonious society. They're not socialist in the old-fashioned, overthrow capitalism style of a lot of previous protests. They are emphasising that they believe society should be something we can actually trust in, and that that's been destroyed by what's happened with the financial sector. They're trying to rebuild that trust. They're not quite certain how. There's a very vague movement, but that is not your man the ramparts, burn everything down.
Some of them are, of course, opposed to capitalism.
Oh, yeah.
And, which you are not. It's
No.
just the form that this capitalism is taking.
I'm opposed to capitalism parasiting itself, which happens when we let the financial sector take over and generate far more debt than we need.
OK, and before we get into that, as far as these protesters are concerned, you've told them that actually they should be going further. In a sense, you've sort of seen it as a call to arms. You said you should be occupying the economics departments of universities.
Yeah. Because basically you don't get into as disastrous a situation we're in now without extraordinarily bad thinking. And the economics departments were the source of that bad thinking.
How far do you think they should go, though? I mean, would you be saying to everybody, get out on the streets? Would you be telling people? I mean, is that the way that you feel about it?
I think, yes. I think we have to change the political power balance right now, because fundamentally the financial sectors, effectively the creditors of the world, were dominant politically. They've certainly set the political agenda for the last 20 or 30 years. The debtors have been down the bottom of the pile. Now we need to reverse that and turn the power back towards the debtors rather than the creditors.
And your argument is that politicians won't listen until there's something to make them listen.
Absolutely. I mean, politicians are reactive individuals. They're not leaders, most of them, vast majority of them. They're been going along with the general trend of believing that larger financial sector, more deregulation is a good thing, and their campaign donations come from there as well as the overall milieu in which they think. To get them to change around from that, they really have to see that as being a dead end, not a way to re-election, but a way to losing elections.
OK, but what your antidote, your solution, is remarkably radical in that, and we should write the debt off, bankrupt the banks, nationalise the financial system and start all over again.
That's if it was easy to do. It's not. If we had the situation of the 1930s where the banks owned all the debt, so the banks had extended the loans, and therefore if you wrote the loans off, the banks were the only sector that would directly suffer, would be easy. The trouble is the banks haven't simply created far more loans than they should have to the debtors. They've also then bundled those in securities and sold those to pension funds and individuals.
So it's too interconnected to
It's far too interconnected to do it in the old-fashioned way of a jubilee. You could not do it without causing as much disruption as you're trying to prevent.
Now, you've used the phrase the old-fashioned way of a jubilee, and that's because it's something that has happened historically.
Yeah, yeah.
Which is a writing off of debts.
Yeah. There's actually one of the... If you've ever been to the